Hi guys, I had the wonderful opportunity to speak to Alexander Kavtaradze about the current situation in Georgia. He explained to me the history leading up to the protests against the government and who is taking part in the manifestations. We also spoke about what the EU is and should be doing to help protect the freedoms of the people of Georgia and how the situation may develop over the next few days and weeks. I hope you enjoyed this. Okay, I'm here with Alexander. Thank you so much, Alexander, for speaking with me today. Alexander, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about what's the situation in Georgia at the moment?
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity. My name is Alexander Kavtaradze. I live in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia. I was born here and I grew up here. I am an invited lecturer at Ilia State University in Tbilisi and also a co-founder of a non-governmental organization called Civic Hall, which works primarily in different regions of the country outside of Tbilisi, outside of the capital, doing work mostly, in educational sector, but also working on different social issues. And we've been doing that for the past few years throughout the country.
So it's a very difficult situation in Georgia at the moment, but it didn't start recently. Can you tell us about when it really began?
Well, it's a really a long story. I mean, and it goes back to this struggle basically between what is now Georgia and its northern neighbor, Russia. It goes back actually to 2 centuries ago, 200 years ago, really, when Russian Empire first started coming into the region, annexing Georgia's kingdoms and principalities as it was back then. And then, there was a brief 3 years, almost 3 years of independence from 1918 to 1921. And then the Soviet troops come back in, or actually come in, because before that it was Russian Empire, and they invade the country with the help of Georgian Bolsheviks as well. And then another 70 years under the Soviet rule. And then Georgia regains its independence in early 90s, in 1991. But once it does that, the real struggle continues, as there's a civil war, two ethnic conflicts in the country, with Russia's heavy involvement in those. And then in 2008, another major war between Georgia and Russia, although it started on a local level between Georgian forces and South Ossetian forces, but Russia was heavily involved, and Russian troops poured in from the north. And the war lasted only for a few days, but Russian troops are now stationed both in South Ossetia and Abkhazia. I would like to say that there are other dimensions to this conflict as well, and there definitely some grievances on all sides, from Georgian, Ossetian sides, and Abkhazian sides. And these are definitely ethnic conflicts as well, and historically have been. But we cannot obviously deny that there is a heavy Russian involvement in this process. So since then, the situation has been tense. The previous government has been replaced through elections in 2012. And this new government afterwards, well, not new anymore, but this current government, the ruling party, came to power in 2012. So they've been in power almost for 12 years now.
And what's happening with the government at the moment? Because we're seeing a lot of protesting on the street. I believe a new law has been pushed through Parliament to arrest people and put them in prison for up to 4 years if they're protesting. Is that right?
Well, the demonstrations really started after the ruling party decided to introduce a so-called foreign agents bill, which they also did last year. They tried and failed last year due to demonstrations, and this year they were really adamant that they're going to go all the way through and adopt this bill as a law of the land of the country. And tomorrow will be the final third reading of this bill, and they will most likely try to adopt this bill as a law. Then the president has already made it clear that she will veto this law, and then another process starts, and it will last probably until June or so. So the main focus of demonstrations has been this foreign agents bill. I mean, they have since last year they have replaced the word agents, the term agents, with just organizations that are carrying out foreign interests. And all the organizations are obviously protesting against being labeled as organizations who are carrying out any foreign interest. And many of these organizations work in educational sectors, on social issues, and many of the important issues, and have been doing that for many years, actually, since Georgia regained its independence, and carrying out important work in many of the villages and towns and cities of the country. And now, actually, the demonstrations are growing bigger and bigger, and the situation remains tense.
Who's taking part in these protests? It seems to be mainly students, but as you said, maybe other organizations as well.
Yeah, so I think the government didn't really expect that so many people would turn out this time around, as they've been carrying out, their Russian-style propaganda throughout this past year, especially in the regions of the country, to convince people that somehow this law on foreign agents was needed. But there's a huge backlash. So it's not just the organizations, but as you've mentioned, the students, for example, today and yesterday, they started going on basically on strike. Not going into universities, protesting outside of universities, having these huge marches. Even today, as we speak, there's this huge march of students from different universities, not only in the capital, but in other big cities of the country, like Kutaisi and Batumi and other places, in other towns even, where there are smaller universities. So the students and young people are the driving force, I would say, of these demonstrations, and they have been attacked actually by the government propaganda because of that. And younger people, even not just students, but even high school pupils have been out in the streets. But if you go out to the streets, you can see that there's a diverse group of people, really, from all backgrounds and different age groups, have come out, especially during the big demonstrations. So there are demonstrations almost every day since the ruling party reintroduced this bill. But there are days when there are big demonstrations, really big demonstrations, and especially on those days, you can see this diverse group of people, from different backgrounds, coming out and demonstrating against this, not just this bill, but this has now turned into demonstrations against this ruling party and against this government.
I've seen a lot of solidarity being given to the people of Georgia from Ukraine. Is there a parallel here, or are we reading too much into this? Is there a parallel with what happened in Ukraine in 2014?
I can definitely tell you that the way I see it, and the way many of Georgians see it, is that this is part of the same fight, part of the same battle. So in that regard, definitely there are similarities. But because in 2014, Ukraine as well, the demonstration started because the government was basically openly shifting its foreign policy there as well, which is what is happening, we believe, in Georgia as well. But if we speak about the demonstrations and the way things are going for now, in Georgia now, the demonstrations are more peaceful, far more peaceful. And although police is using, all of they're using all of their forces, all special units, and they're using, they're employing violence against the demonstrators as well. We could definitely say that it's far more peaceful at this point, and we hope that it stays that way. And all these different youth groups and protesters are really hopeful that it stays that way, and actually are openly stating that their wish is for these demonstrations to stay peaceful, but to put maximum pressure on the government nevertheless. Demonstrating every day in different spaces, in different places, in different cities, throughout the country. So in that regard, I see clear differences, and we hope it stays that way, but we will definitely continue exerting maximum pressure on the government, by all means,
So,
by all means.
yeah, so as you're saying, there's maximum pressure being applied by the protesters and people within Georgia. Outside Georgia, for example, the European Union or the international community, what would the protesters like to see the EU, for example, do in the days ahead?
Yeah, so today actually there's a delegation from EU countries visiting Georgia, and it's quite telling that the government officials have refused to meet them. So this delegation has met with some of the non-governmental organizations and different groups in the country, and we're also expecting a visit from the State Department from the United States. And our hope at this point is that if this bill is adopted, that there will be clear statements, but not just statements, also actions when it comes to sanctioning, for example, the leadership of the ruling party and people connected to them and supporting them financially or otherwise. So there is a clear expectation, I can tell you, that from the people demonstrating outside, that there will be some concrete steps when it comes to sanctioning, the ruling party, the oligarch that is behind the ruling party, Bidzina Ivanishvili, who is seen as basically the sole ruler at this point of this whole process and the country as well, who is behind the curtain most of the time. He's not formally a prime minister. But he's basically, everybody agrees and everybody knows, and everybody openly declares, even in the ruling party, that he's the person who is actually in charge. So we're expecting sanctions, basically, from our allies and friends in the EU and outside of the EU, and hopefully that will be the case.
What sort of events are planned over the next few days in regards to the protests?
So what is interesting is that actually most of the time these protests don't have any one group organizing it or leading it. There are many different groups, and sometimes people just use social media just to know. Let each other know where the next location will be of demonstrations, or when will they gather. So in that regard, it is always hard to tell what will be the next steps, in the next few days. What we know for now, for definitely, is that there are demonstrations right now outside of the parliament, and the main avenue is blocked, the main avenue of the capital. There are demonstrations in different big cities of the country. Mainly, in other cities, there are mainly students and young people out in the streets, but not just. And what we know is that tomorrow is the day when the ruling party plans to adopt this bill after the third hearing, and this bill will become law. So at this point, that's what we know. There will be demonstrations tonight as well as tomorrow. And then the next step is actually what President has already said, that she will use her veto power, and then this law will go back to the parliament, and they'll probably have another 2 weeks of discussing this, and actually depending also on the pressure from outside, from EU or other institutions, or even countries outside of EU as well. We'll see what the outcome will be, and whether the ruling party will back down, or whether the situation remains tense up until the elections, and hopefully we'll get there, which is in late October here, unless there will be some other steps taken by the government, which will create a really tense situation, and then who knows, what will be the next steps from the side of the public and the demonstrators outside.
So that's interesting about elections coming up soon. So I know it's difficult to predict, but what is the feeling towards the elections? Is there going to be a real change taking place, or does it depend on a number of factors? What's happening over the next few days?
Yeah, I think it will depend to some extent on what we'll see in the coming days, even, and weeks. But I can tell you now that from the streets, but also from what we've been hearing from different villages and towns and other cities of the country, the situation is really changing. So the government propaganda is no longer working, the ruling party propaganda is no longer working, which means that the situation is changing and has changed already, basically. So if there are proper elections, even like tomorrow or in October, the feeling is that the government has already lost the elections, and there will be some kind of a coalition government of opposition parties, because we don't see any one opposition party gaining power or full majority at this point. So they will definitely need some kind of a coalition. But at that point, we also hope that at least that there's been a discussion about another elections after the elections in October, if we get there peacefully, to have another elections in 1 year time, without any pressure from the ruling party, without them using all their funds and administrative resources, and having those elections, and then forming another government, most likely a coalition government again, which will lead the country for 4 years until the next elections. The president has been discussing that as well, and putting out that idea, and as well, of another elections after the elections that are coming up. So we are hoping that we'll get there, and the feeling is that the government has already lost the support that it had, in the country. And especially in the regions, which gives us hope as well, because in the cities it is already clear that they've lost support, but also in the smaller towns and villages, that's what we've been hearing and we've been seeing with our own eyes as well.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. And I want to send solidarity with the people of Georgia and their struggle against this government, who obviously are not interested in protecting human rights and freedoms. So thank you once again, Alexander, for speaking with me today.
For this possibility, it was great to speak to you, and it was wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you for your solidarity.
Thank you.